It's highly unlikely that Mary wrote a memoir that Luke had in order to write this gospel. It's highly unlikely that a 14-year-old girl would travel 4 days' journey on foot from Galilee to Judea. There's a lot of things in this story that are highly unlikely. But we have to remember that the last books of the New Testament to be written were the Gospels. Now, we put them first in the order of the readings. Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, very historical. But they weren't written first. The first writings were Paul's letters. Thessalonians was the first. And the Gospels were written for the purpose of bringing out in graphic form the belief of the discipleship. What the people who followed Jesus 50, 60, 70 years later believed about Jesus. And so when Luke writes all these very lovely vignettes about the beginnings of Jesus' life, which the first gospel, Mark, didn't have anything to do with. He starts right off with Jesus going public at about 30 years of age. What Luke is trying to do is to flesh out in descriptive, narrative language the beliefs of the community. So this reading today, the so-called visitation, is not about Mary as much as it is about Jesus. What Luke is trying to convince his readers of is that God has intervened in the history of the human family in a very, very unexpected and unique way by becoming one of us. Through the cooperation of Mary, a human being, involving people like Zachary and Elizabeth and John the Baptist and all of the others. But the important thing, and this is good for us to remember as we tomorrow night enter into the Christmas season, is that it's all about God's intervention in our lives. And the way he intervened in the lives of these historical people is not really as important as it is for us the way he intervenes in your life and in my life. Because like creation, which isn't an event which happened 5,000 years ago or 5 billion years ago if you're a scientist, it's not something that happened because creation didn't happen. Creation is ongoing. It's ongoing through time. God is always sustaining the universe, the cosmos, the newly discovered cosmoses, an ongoing process. And God's intervention in history in the person of Jesus, son of Mary, is an ongoing event. It's happening day in and day out in the lives of people like you and me. And those of us who have committed ourselves to Christ and been baptized into his very life experience this intervention even more even with more awareness than some of our contemporaries who have not yet met Christ. But yet he is still coming. He is still coming. He is still God is intervening through Jesus, because what happened as Paul says very clearly in his writings, is that the life that came into the world is now shared out with many, many, many people. Millions, billions of people. And it's in their lives that God is continually intervening in his world. And so what we need to do during Christmas time is not so much marvel at past events, although they were certainly marvelous, but to be perceptive enough to see God's interventions today, in my life, in this very day, in the people that I will meet in the course of this day or this week or the rest of my life. God isn't standing back watching us respond to an historical event. God is leaning forward into our lives with contemporary events, contemporary people, contemporary interventions of his love. And that's what we need to be more and more aware of, lest we get caught up in history Because when you get into the historical narrative, you're going to face all kinds of problems. 14-year-old girls traveling 4 days journey through two countries. It didn't happen that way. But it's painted that way by Luke in order to bring the reality of God's presence in Jesus in our lives today. Not as something, a figment of the imagination, but a fact of reality. Present reality. Your life and my life. And you can't get any more present than that.